Hi, hello, and welcome back to The High Method. My name is Jen Hatz. I am the host of The High Method podcast and also the founder of The High Method, a holistic, integrative, and innovative approach to assessing and optimizing human health, well-being, and performance. And I'm partnered with Neuroforce One, a human performance company that has been training champions for years, and they offer training and assessments in their facility as well as remote options available. And if you have heard of the GLP-1 analog, the latest medications that are out there that are trending, Ozempic specifically is the medication I'm talking about that is trending, and there's a whole lot of buzz around this medication and what it's used for or what it's intended for, and then kind of the trends about why it's being promoted in certain ways across certain populations. And so I want to dive into this entire topic of not only Ozempic, the specific medication, but also what it's doing, what a GLP-1 analog is and what it does, and where it is potentially useful and where it is potentially not useful, and really try to uncover and unwrap this entire topic, because there's a whole lot of headlines out there and a whole lot of press and buzzwords and trending and all that stuff around it. And I think there's a little too much potential misinformation that's being spread and potentially misleading and potentially harmful uses of that misinformation. So trying to get into this topic now. So Ozempic specifically, it's a GL1P analog. So if you're wondering what that means, GLP-1, is a glucagon-like peptide. And so it's a naturally occurring hormone that you already produce yourself. But in this case, this is an analog, so it's analogous to this hormone. It's an outside source, basically, of this hormone to try to have the same impact on your body that this hormone would have. So your normal functioning glucagon-like peptides, these are already present within your gut, specifically within the gut mucosal lining. So your gut has this very particular barrier that is a mucosal barrier that lines the inside of the gut, and it helps to separate the activity of your microbiota, the actual living bacteria that are inside of your gut, from the integrity of the gut lining, and then therefore to protect from what is outside of the gut lining, which is the rest of your body, really. So you have this mucosal barrier that has this protective mechanism, but it also, as you can see, it also has other properties as well, like having these glucagon-like peptides present. And so these peptides are hormones. Now, hormones within the body act kind of like messengers, where they're communicating in different ways. And so hormones can act as a messenger, getting communication from the brain to another part of the body, or from one part of the body to another part of the body. And it's this method of allowing this communication to happen so that way your body can maintain processes and sync up whatever is needed, whether it needs to produce something else or use whatever is produced to do something else. So it's these, very critical messengers that keeps everything functioning. And so what this particular GLP-1 does, so like I said, it's present within your gut mucosal lining. And when you eat food, so all types of foods, and when I say food, I'm talking about nutritionally, we're talking about your macronutrients, all types of foods. We're talking about all three macronutrients, carbohydrates, fats, proteins. These equally create this effect where they're stimulating GLP-1 release from the mucosal lining, and that is triggering insulin to be released from your pancreas. So this GLP-1 is acting as this hormone that is sending a signal to your pancreas to release insulin. And so this hormone then, as part of your gut lining, plays an important role in your overall, not only your insulin production and release, but then your overall blood glucose management. And again, this is happening, like I said, in response to anything you eat that is triggering or allowing to promote this GLP-1 activity to then support insulin. So if you're ever wondering if you've ever heard about, comments about insulin, that it's only specific to carbohydrate, that is not true. It is all three of your macronutrients, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, that are equally having this impact, this effect on eventually triggering insulin release from the pancreas. Now, the reason why all this is important is because research started to show a relationship between this hormone, this GLP-1 hormone within your gut lining, your gut mucosal lining, and a relationship with that with type 2 diabetes. So if you can imagine now what I just described about how this hormone being triggered from your gut is helping to signal for insulin to be released, now you can see that there's very, it's much more clear to see that there's a relationship here with then type 2 diabetes, where there is insulin resistance and potentially a lack of insulin being produced from the pancreas. So there are a few different ways that type 2 diabetes can play out, especially long-term and chronically. But what we can see from research is that there's a connection here. And so years now of research has been done on this exact connection and trying to see in what ways to optimize really the health of an individual, knowing that there's this relationship between this hormone being released within the gut and what ends up looking like your insulin signaling, and could potentially play a role then in some sort of an insulin signaling dysfunction or imbalance. So the research has been ongoing for years about how to try to figure this thing out and really what the relationship looks like. And a little bit of this research is kind of a debate of like the chicken or the egg. Is someone who is let's say predisposed, or they're in some way at risk of type 2 diabetes, does that impact their GLP-1 activity, their natural hormone activity from the gut? Or is it the opposite? Is it something that was happening with the hormone activity within the gut that is now predisposing them to type 2 diabetes? So there's this interesting contrast of which came first or what affects what, but we do know that there's a relationship here. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit more specifically in a bit here. But so the concept then behind all this research was to create this analog. So this is where the medications start to come in. These are analogous to your naturally occurring hormones, but in this case, it's exogenous. It exists outside the body. It is, in this case, an FDA-approved medicine that could be administered in order to have the effects that that hormone would have on you. So if you were, for whatever reason, not producing that hormone in your gut lining to help initiate this insulin signaling, then having this outside source to, if anything, trigger that hormonal signaling is seen really as this potentially life-saving medical intervention. And so that's exactly what it is. It's for these situations where if insulin signaling is abnormal or imbalanced and it's placing your life really at risk for uncontrolled blood glucose management, then the use of this medication can be potentially life-saving because it's helping to trigger this hormonal cascade that for whatever reason your body is not doing on its own. So you can see that there is this natural, we'll say like a benefit that we can see of why we would want to have something like this available as a potential life-saving tool for those who would absolutely need it. Now, here's the rub. Here's where all the buzz and the trends start to zero in on, is using this medication for the sake of weight loss, because of not only this impact that it can have on your overall blood glucose management, but also because of an appetite suppressant effect that it can have, really because you're managing your blood glucose levels. So this combination here is very appealing for the sake of wanting to achieve weight loss and wanting to have an extra tool in your toolbox for managing overall, dietary intake, food intake, and maybe if there's binge eating behaviors and you're trying to get control of that. So you can see very clearly that the desire would be there to have something like this that is, in this case, a medical grade appetite suppressant, but it's also helping to regulate blood glucose. But this is, like I said, it's an outside hormone. It's an outside source that is triggering this hormonal cascade. And so we start to look at if anything, the chronic adaptations that may be taking place that we don't yet know, and also if anything, the moral or the ethical question of whether or not something that maybe if there's something within our lifestyle that we can control, do we really want to look at something that is a chemical alteration to our physiology as being the answer if we can do that ourselves? Really, if there's something within our control, within our lifestyle factors that we can take control of to have the effect that we want to have without needing to rely on something that is, like I said, a chemically altering substance, because that's what it's doing. It is an outside chemical that is altering your physiology. And so we don't always have the answers of what that looks like for individuals and any potential interactions or adverse reactions or side effects, but also the chronic long-term effects, which I think is probably the scarier part of the picture that no one wants to look at, because everyone wants to see something that is real right now. I want results right now. I want to have my health improved right now. And we're not always keen on the long-term effects. So there's a lot of buzz and potential, we'll say, arguments and controversy around this topic because of these different ways in which it's seen as potentially beneficial and useful, but also potentially harmful if we're viewing it for a certain outcome that doesn't necessarily fit the picture of what it was intended for. I hope that's making sense the way I'm all saying this, right? Because we want to allow ourselves to be completely compassionate for those who would require it, but we also equally want to allow compassion for those who might be seeking out some way to help, some tool to help with, especially if there's like an ongoing battle with trying to manage weight, and especially if it's coming down to the point where you feel like you've tried everything and you just want that extra tool, that extra, step to help get you going. This is where kind of the waters get a little murky of where we feel, I would say, allowing ourselves to be compassionate for anyone's decision-making when it comes to what they want to do for their health. If the goal is health and the goal is to improve health, both right now and long-term, then that's phenomenal. And let's try to get the most well-rounded and holistic package together so that way you have a nice, healthy, sustainable route that you can maintain for life without having any adverse effects over time. Now, I want to talk about what could be then a natural way, or we'll say a non-pharmaceutical way, a non-medicine route to go, where you would be looking at your body and your physiology, how it actually occurs in real life based on your lifestyle factors and what you can do in order to take care of your health so that way you don't have to go the route of a medicine. So, as I said with this GLP-1, that it is released from your gut mucosa. So here's the interesting thing, and this actually goes right back to the beginning when I talked about how the research was kind of split of where and in what ways this relationship between this hormone in your gut mucosa and type 2 diabetes, which one came first, chicken or the egg? So I'm going to give you a little rundown here. Your gut mucosa, that mucosal lining, is very sensitive. It's very vulnerable. And there are two main ways in which it may break down. So like I said, the gut mucosa, it's separating your bacteria populations from your gut lining, from the actual cell lining, the actual, integrity of the cells. And so it's acting as this barrier. Now, your bacteria, we like to think of our bacteria as, we're the host of this bacteria, all these different populations of bacteria. We are hosting them, and we also have to feed them. And when we feed them, what we're feeding them with specifically is from fiber. Fiber within our diet. The variety of different plant fibers across our diet are feeding our gut microbiota. And when our gut microbiota, when those bacterial populations are well fed on fiber, then they're happy and they actually help to serve a benefit to us, the host. But when they're not being fed the fiber that they need, they will instead feed on the environment around them. And in this case, that's the mucosal lining. So your bacteria will actually start to feed on the mucosal lining that is there to protect, but instead that turns into a food source for them if they're not otherwise being fed the fiber that they need to be fed. So that's one way in which your gut mucosal lining may be breaking down. It's because you're not taking in enough fiber consistently, chronically, in order to feed your bacteria what they need in order for them to be happy and satisfied. Now, the other way, and this is an interesting one, is the impact of stress. So stress, and I'm talking not just acute stress, but chronic stress, and the effects of stress on your physiology is shown to have a relationship with your mucosal lining breaking down. Now, this is actually another question of, is it the chicken or the egg? Which one came first? Is it chronic stress that is breaking down this mucosal lining? Or is it this mucosal lining breaking down, like if your bacteria are not happy and they're eating away at your mucosal lining, and that's predisposing you to a higher stress response? It's kind of an interesting concept if you start to think about it, that this relationship could really be, it could be bidirectional, but there could be a very clear direction from one thing to another. And so it kind of clues us in on some areas that we would want to look at and want to focus on. So if you're interested on this topic and learning about those details, this is actually a very particular topic that I'm studying for my PhD. So I will be releasing more information about that. If you want to follow the High Method podcast, that is where I release information on the research that I conduct. And in this case, this very particular topic of not only the gut-brain connection, but on the impact of stress on the gut integrity with this mucosal lining and what that means really for you and what this relationship looks like if it's stress impacting your gut Or is your gut impacting your stress response? Because once we know that, then we can start to look at what is within our control. And so to piece this all together, then what you can start to do right now to look at what is within your control, you can first start to look at your diet and pay attention to how much fiber you are taking in, the varieties of fibers you're taking in. If you're taking in the right, we'll say ratio, the right amounts in total of soluble and insoluble fibers from a variety of plant sources. And the best indication for you of whether or not you're taking in fiber is to first look at how many fruits and vegetables you're taking in, how many whole grains in their whole form, and specifically how many beans and legumes, how many servings of beans and legumes are you taking in. These are going to be the primary sources of fiber that you want to look for across your diet to get a good idea of whether or not you're taking in the overall quantity and the quality or the different ratio and different types of fibers. So zero in on that fiber and that high fiber diet. And then you can also take there's a saliva test. It's called a salivary SIGA. So it's a saliva test, but it's testing for a very particular biomarker that will come up when your mucosal lining is degraded enough, specifically in response to stress. But we can just identify that it's a degradation of your mucosal lining. So you can actually get clued in to whether or not your mucosal lining is impaired and whether or not that could then be impairing your overall metabolic health, your overall insulin management, your overall blood glucose management, because you're able to zero it in to the point where that mucosal lining may not be intact. And this is going to be your biggest clue of whether or not you have your GLP-1 hormones then functioning appropriately for your insulin signaling. So it's huge how intricate this one detail can be of identifying your gut mucosal lining. And so, like I said, that is a saliva test. You can find it easily online. Just Google a saliva SIGA test, and it's something you can do at home and send the test in with the test kit. You can get your results. And once you know the status of your gut mucosal lining and really your status of gut health in general from that, it's not going to give you the full, it's not a stool assessment. So you're not getting any of that. What it's telling you is the integrity of your gut lining. Once you know that, and after you've zeroed in on a fiber intake, now you can look at more natural and holistic gut health protocols that can help to, if anything, to help build up that mucosal lining steadily and safely while you are eating these foods throughout your diet and addressing your overall lifestyle factors, like specifically addressing your stress. And addressing your stress is not always easy, but if we can focus first on addressing our sleep, which is going to help us handle stress, and also address not only how much stress we are taking on, but whether or not we are taking on stress when we're in a position to be able to handle it. So all of this ends up being this real big concept within sports science, really, of identifying your body's stress response and whether or not you are ready. It's almost like a readiness score to take on more stressors. And so identifying your stress response, looking at whether or not you're in a good state to be able to take on something like physical activity or stress with work, or if you need to scale back, being able to identify all of this is a really huge concept. And actually Neuroforce One has an app that syncs up to your wearable device. Your wearable device is going to tell you, in essence, a big picture about where your stress is at in general. So it's not a particular, you're super stressed, don't do anything. It's instead giving you a little bit of a roadmap and identifying really that if you are in an elevated stress response, then maybe you would need to make these adjustments, for instance, in your workout. So very cool concept. And again, that comes heavily from sports science, but now it's being put into specifically this training app that Neuroforce One now has out and available. So you can download that for free right now. And all of this being said, that gut health protocol, like I mentioned, having this like natural, holistic way to protect your gut while you are going through these changes in your lifestyle, and for your gut to actually help build itself back up into a healthy state, for your gut microbiota to be happy because they're being fed what they need to be fed. And you can help to balance out for any potential overgrowth of bad bacteria within your gut. And in doing all of this, your physiology helps to build up the integrity of your gut lining, that mucosal lining. And as an added benefit then, your GLP-1 signaling, that hormonal signaling, should be optimized then. And you will see these downscale kind of cascading effects and benefits from all of this. And so Neuroforce One is also releasing this gut health protocol called Reset. And it is a variety of ingredients. It's specifically a very high ingredient that is all microdosed. And all of these ingredients are different plants and herbs that are providing your gut specifically with the benefits of those different plants and herbs, but in a wide variety. So like I said, that wide variety of all different plant fibers is what we want to aim for. And that's really the basis for this gut health protocol. But it's also going to do everything I just said about helping to balance out your gut microbial populations and helping you to build up your mucosal gut lining once again. So after all that is said, so the big three that you want to focus on is focusing on the fiber content of your diet, focusing on managing your stress levels, and I'll say as a third, but with 3 parts to it, you can get your SIG, your salivary SIG tested to see the status of your mucosal lining. You can download the Neuroforce One app to start training in a way that is accommodating to your stress response instead of overdoing the stress on your system. And you can start taking Reset as that gut health protocol, so that way you are getting basically the trifecta and really starting to manage how your body is handling physiologically everything that you are experiencing across your lifestyle. Let me know if you learned something new about this topic. And if you have any questions about this topic, please feel free to drop a comment below. And otherwise, if you can like, share, and subscribe so we can spread the love and spread the light. Thank you. Bye-bye.